Surprise! It's Angina from RuPaul's Drag Race, and you're probably wondering, what's Angina doing here? Well, this year I am the host of the Walk Show for AIDS Walk Los Angeles 2021, and I want you to join me after this conversation for that. But for now, let's learn more about APLA Health.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this special discussion about It's a Sin as part of the OutFronts presented by OutFest. I'm Anthony Allen Ramos from GLAAD, and I'm so excited for this conversation today. And I am joined by the creator of It's a Sin, Russell Davies.
Hello, hi, thanks for having me. I'm a producer and writer here in the UK. I created Queer as Folk many years ago as well, and it's an honor to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, next up, we have the director of It's a Sin, Peter Hoar.
Hi, hello, I'm Peter Hoar, director of It's a Sin and Umbrella Academy and a number of other projects, and a big fan of Russell T. Davies.
The love fest all around. Okay, next up, we have Omari Douglas, who starred as Roscoe in It's a Sin.
Hello. So I played Roscoe in It's a Sin, and I'm also based in the UK, and I'm very happy to be here.
All right, next up, we have another star. He played Ash. It is Nathaniel Curtis.
Hello, hi, I'm Nathaniel. I played Ash, and I'm also based in the UK.
Lots of love for the UK. Okay, now we'll come back. We have kind of a legend, I have to say, the creator of The Real World and so many more amazing projects, Jonathan Murray.
Thanks. Very fortunate that when we set out to make The Real World, we decided that we would put together a diverse group of people. So that meant we always had to have LGBTQ people included, which turned out to be a real blessing.
Thank you so much. Okay, next up, we've got a good friend of mine, actor and comedian and all-around good guy, Daniel Franzisi.
Hey, what's up? I'm Daniel Franzisi. I entered the conversation about HIV/AIDS because I played Eddie Bear on HBO's Looking, which was the first HIV-positive character in a storyline on TV within a 6-year gap before Gloria Rubin in ER.
Oh, Eddie Bear, love so much. Okay, last but not least, we have the creator of Noah's Ark, Patrik-Ian Polk.
Hi, I am Patrik-Ian Polk, and as he said, I'm the creator of Noah's Ark, and also co-exec producer of The Chi and P-Valley.
So, we're here today. Obviously, It's a Sin, such a powerful series. And I was thinking, it's 5 episodes on HBO Max, but it feels so much bigger. And I felt like I had been with these characters for so long. So I guess, Russell, for you, if I may start with you as the creator, what was your whole, motivation and reason of wanting to go back to, the 80s and early 90s in London to talk about exactly this, what it was like, potentially for people living during the AIDS and HIV crisis.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I was late. Where was I? Where was I for all those decades? And it's funny, I was talking to a psychologist the other day who said actually sometimes it takes she genuinely said it could take 30 years to overcome trauma and talk about it. She had a theory that my brain had waited that long in order to get a perspective on it. I don't know if it's that simple, although kind of sounds good. But it's. I was always going to write it. It was always. It kind of ticks away in my work. I first did an HIV story on children's television in 1994 on a program called Children's Ward. So, which is kind of like a junior ER. So it's always been there, ticking away. And if anything, I'm kind of glad maybe that I waited because I picked up some skills as a writer and kind of got a bit of clout in the industry and the power to do it. And thank you for your kind words. But really, the people on this Zoom are really, and I think Peter would join me in saying this, it's all about the cast. I think the cast I've written before and not had things come to life like this. Believe you me, oh my God. And this law and all of the set fire. They set fire. I don't know if you saw the other night, we had Ollie Alexander, but the Brits with Elton John, that's our version of the Grammys, and it's the most sensational performance. They performed the song "It's a Sin," and that boy just set fire to the world. He's astonishing, and so was this, and Lydia as well. So we got very lucky. That's what I'm saying.
No, the cast is magical, and I feel like watching it, I felt like I was friends with them, and I wanted to be friends with them, and it just you could feel the chemistry and the connection that you all had. But before I go to our two cast members, Peter, if I can go to you, because I think I said earlier that it's 5 parts, but it feels like this grand thing, it's just like it's so epic. And I know it was divided kind of, every episode is a different year. So tell me a little bit about how, with your direction, Peter, you wanted to kind of break it up that way.
Well, it was Russell. I mean, I followed Russell's direction, really. We always knew it was a 10-year story from 81 to 91. I mean, one of the things that tends not to happen in life is there aren't major changes. When, we think of the 80s now in retrospect, we think of the 90s and we look back and go, that's a 90s thing, that's an 80s thing. But actually living from 81 to 91, it doesn't change as dramatically as that. Music is actually probably one of those things that really does remind you of a period and remind you of a time. And Russell, beautifully wrote in some of the music. I added some more because it just felt like that's how I remember that time and then those moments and that dance floor and that timing. So it felt like music, apart from the fact that the story had to move on in the way that it did. And I'd score it with music where, absolutely appropriately. And so that we could feel something that's moving forward. If you have a recollection of that time, you'll remember those tunes. I didn't pick anything particularly obscure. I picked things that I hoped would be quite popular, quite memorable for people. And then if you'd never heard of any of those tracks, then even better, because you'll go and find them and discover them and hear them for the first time and go, wow, actually the 80s was all right, wasn't it? Well, no, sorry, it wasn't. But I mean, at least some of the music was, and we can live and love and enjoy it again. And actually, talking about Ollie's amazing performance the other night, I actually just stumbled on something this morning where someone's done a cover version of Running Up That Hill but based on the fact that they heard it again in our show, and it's a beautiful, like, sort of male voice doing it, and it's a little electronica. Anyway, I don't know who it is, but I'm like, wow, it keeps giving. This is a wonderful gift.
No, I mean, the soundtrack is killer. I mean, I was living for the music, especially even in, I think it was episode 2 or 3, you played Gloria in the credits for seasons and a little homage to Gloria. But anyway, I have to get to the amazing cast that are here. Omari, if I may jump to you, tell me about what it was like for you to step into the very fabulous shoes of Roscoe for this project.
It was completely amazing, and it was, I think already on the page, like, you've got someone who, it's quite interesting, sort of a journey. You sort of see people finding themselves, and of course, like, Roscoe does find himself, but I feel like it's in a different way. It's sort of, I think what was like extraordinary to me is that he's so confident and like so assured in who he is, in his sexuality, in his identity, and he sort of like takes that out into the world with him, like with just sort of this sort of this sort of carefree, like, abandon. And it was really interesting to me as well, because, you know, I sort of thinking of the context and sort of the relations at the time, and just sort of, you know, I spoke to people and just sort of about, you know, what it was like to be gay and Black, and to sort of navigate both of those communities at the time. And you might assume that it is a difficult thing, but then actually I think what people were doing was they were just living. And I think that is exactly what Roscoe does. Like, he just lives so authentically, and and you know, you mentioned that fabulousness, and that is him. That is part of his identity. And actually it's his shield as well, because I think, you know, there is that sort of, he carries that campness around with him, which is like, it's very subversive. And I think that is a way to sort of like, just sort of, I don't know, sort of stick a middle finger up at the system, and just sort of, yeah, that is him. And I absolutely loved being able to sort of just embody that, like, completely. And that was, I felt like that we were able to sort of flesh that out in so many different departments. And, you know, like, Ian Fulcher, who was our costume designer, he was absolutely incredible at sort of like piecing all of those things together. And it was really nice, like, being able to collaborate with in that way, like, have all of those discussions about those things, because, you know, I keep talking about identity, and those are the things that sort of like help to form him, and that they're really considered things. And it was really nice being able to sort of look into the culture at the time as well, when fashion and music and nightlife were really sort of like safe havens for queer people.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I just have to say, I'll never look at a coffee pot or coffee urn the same way. What's in there? Nathaniel, if I may go to you, as we mentioned that you play Ash, I mean, arguably, I think Richie's true love. I mean, maybe some people would agree with that, some people wouldn't. What would you, just thinking about the relationship between your two characters in the first episode to the end, what was it like for you to go back to a time and to realize that people, you know, would not be able to see their loved ones because of situations like that were happening with Richie and all of that? What was it like to kind of get a glimpse into how challenging and unfair it could have been for someone who was living with HIV or AIDS?
I think actually unfair is probably the best word to use there. And you know, when we were filming those scenes, we all get along so well that in filming the scenes where, you know, we were losing characters and things were particularly sad, I think that there was a sadness that kind of took over, because, you know, I wasn't alive in the 80s, but kind of tapping back into that, there was a loneliness which kind of came with it, which is so awful to, you know, think about these people who had to go all through all these horrible things, and then to be, you know, removed from their family. You know, a lot of the characters went home, which is kind of like the phrase that you'd use for leaving and going and dying alone, or with a family that had rejected them. And I think that's incredibly, it was just sad. And I think that their love story, you know, you start in episode 1 and it's so confident and it's so sexy and it's really vibrant and it's really, really fun. And then by the time you get to the final episode, it's so kind of domestic and quiet and just sad, just so desperately sad. And I think that the beautiful writing, obviously Russell's writing, I think there didn't have to be any grand speeches of how unfair it all was between them. It was just, you just saw how much pain they were in. And I think that is just devastating, which was really fun to play.
No, such a great character. You know, as we are here, obviously today, celebrating and chatting about It's a Sin, the amazing series that we have on HBO Max. We're so lucky today to also be joined by some other people who have made such incredible achievements and contributions to representation of people living with and affected by HIV and AIDS. So, you know, thinking about it, we have the 80s with It's a Sin. We have the 90s covered with Pedro Zamora. Jonathan Murray is here representing the real world. And then with Noah's Ark, obviously in the 2000s, and then the 2010s, Looking, starring Daniel Franzese. So very nice to have kind of a bunch of different voices. So Jonathan, if I can go up to you, thinking back on the 90s and how groundbreaking it was for Pedro Zamora to be on the real world. You know, thinking back, was it a fight for you to have to get that, to be able to be on TV?
No, it wasn't a fight at all, because the very DNA of the series required us to have a diverse cast. And when we were going to San Francisco, how could you not go there in 1993 and not have someone who was part of that AIDS community? The surprising thing was that while we were looking in San Francisco, we got a letter from Pedro, who was living in Miami, who had come over in the Mariel boat lift from Cuba, whose mother had died when he was a teen, and who had found out in a high school blood drive that he was HIV positive. And he just wanted a chance to get away from his conservative family, go to San Francisco and fall in love, and educate people along the way. So sort of an amazing thing to open that letter. And that's the excitement of reality TV. You never know where the story's going to take you. Pedro just did so much good being on that show. And it was interesting hearing the conversation when he got sick later. His family wanted him to come home to Miami. And, between when he had left and when he returned to Miami, he had met Sean Sasser and, had that commitment ceremony on the show. And so it was an adjustment for his family to suddenly realize there was, that he had a partner in his life, but they wanted him at home, in his final days. So a lot of parallels.
What was it like for you to see the country and people respond so strongly to Pedro and his story and what we were seeing on the real world?
Well, I think I've always believed that if you get to know people, you realize you're not so different from them. And I think that was the amazing thing about Pedro is people got to know him as someone living with HIV/AIDS. He wasn't dying of it, as he said, he was living with it. And they saw this full life, and they just saw his care and compassion for everyone. And so it cut through a lot of the bull that was out there about the disease. And as President Clinton said, it did more to educate young people than anything the White House could do.
No, I mean, there's so much power in television, which obviously at GLAAD is what we realize, and that's why we fight so hard for these representations. Well, Patrick, first off, so excited about the next season of P-Valley. Such a good show. But thinking back on the original Noah's Ark, in that time in the 2000s, there was not, enough. There was hardly any Black queer representation on television. And I think obviously that's what made Noah's Ark so revolutionary. But, how did you approach, not only making it about Black queer people, but Black queer people living with and affected by HIV and AIDS?
Well, growing up, I wanted to see images of, myself on screen. And as you said, there really were none anywhere. And so I had done my first film, Punks, a few years prior, and I was looking for a way to sort of have a broader reach. And so I came up with the idea to do Noah's Ark. And actually, the idea was inspired by a conference I attended that was sponsored by the Black AIDS Institute, which was a sort of brand new organization at the time that was started by Phil Wilson to address the AIDS HIV epidemic in the Black community, which, at the time was just so rampant. And they had this event where they invited Black queer men from all walks of life, all industries to come together and think tank, brainstorm how we could go forth into our respective fields and somehow positively affect the HIV AIDS problem in the Black community. And so obviously my field is, creative and film and television. So the key thing that led me to it was, that was the first time I saw a group of men Black gay men, successful, accomplished. And that's what made me think, okay, I can do this and I can make this happen. And I have this group of people to draw from for financial support. And that's what happened. That group got me money to do the pilot. And again, because the connection to the Black AIDS Institute and all the work that they were doing, educating us so that we could then go out and, educate other people, I was inspired specifically by Phil Wilson and the work that this one man was doing. He was like a one-man army at the time, to include the issue in this show in a real way, not just an episode, not just, in Punks, I had one of the four main characters actually was HIV positive. And so for this, I thought, how can I approach this, again, influenced by the Institute? How can I approach this in a broader way? And so that's how that led me to create Alex. And he was working in the field, starting an organization in his community to affect change. And then that allowed us, an open door to explore the issue in different ways. And so we were able to do that.
Well, it was done so well. And, thinking back to the original run, the 2 seasons, such a lasting impact and a lasting legacy. What was it like for you to, in 2005 and 2006, when the show was airing, to immediately see people connect to it? What kind of things, we didn't have, the direct thing with social media back then, but what was it like to see fans and the community just really, really connecting with these characters so deeply?
When I started Noah's Ark, it began as a 6-minute short film and then introduced our main characters. And I put that film on the web, and the internet wasn't quite what it is today, but it blew up. It blew up to the point where I kept having to add more and more space to the website to cover the traffic that we were getting. And we were getting traffic from literally all over the world. Like you could kind of see on a graphic where your hits were coming from. And it was like military bases, US military bases all over the world, other countries, Africa. And so I instantly knew that there was this hunger for this type of programming. And in the short was all about Noah and Wade have been dating and they're going to have sex for the first time. But through a series of comedic errors, they don't have a condom, and they're trying to decide, are we just going to do it without it, or are we going to, be responsible? And so that's the whole dilemma in the pilot, as it were. And Noah calls his friends and he asks them for their advice. And of course, they all have different advice. So it was really, again, tackling this issue head on in a very direct way, in a way that was attempting to be entertaining and sexy and fun and relatable. And so it just blew up, and I instantly knew we have to do more, we have to do more, we have to do more. And of course, a year and a half, 2 years later, we were on television, and it was really remarkable because, again, you'd never had anything Black and gay on TV before, nothing like this. And where we were the center, the story was about us. And so to this day, the response is so incredible. The fans, what this show meant to multiple generations of Black gay men, so many adults now, men in their 30s, say, I was a teenager hiding in the closet watching this show, So in many ways, good or bad, we helped to raise a generation of Black gay men. And so what was really exciting was to find organic ways to include these messages and this information in the show, so that the Black gay men, especially who were watching, could be educated about this important issue. So it was all really exciting. It's still really exciting. I still can't believe we have not had a show that's anything like it on air. I'm very hopeful that will still happen, but yeah.
Daniel, if I may jump over to you now to join this conversation. Looking has such a fond spot for me. I think about it all the time. I need to watch it again because it's been a while, but it was such an important series. But looking back on your character, the show obviously came out when PrEP became more prevalent, and I think education about, undetectability, started talking. So what was it like for you to play this character? And, because you're such an activist, obviously, but, just tell me about that experience, because I think it was such an important character and an important show.
What I didn't realize, I was excited when they offered me the character. When they initially spoke with me, they were like, he's never going to get sick, and he's going to be loved for how he handles his status, and not necessarily in spite of it, which I found really exciting and forward moving. I felt I was an educated gay man on a lot of things about being a healthy sexual or whatever, but like I found out so much information researching this character and becoming an ambassador for Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation that was not commonly, it just wasn't commonly spoken about. As a matter of fact, we were the first show to speak about PrEP. When I learned that PrEP existed, I got so impassioned by it, I ended up on the show, the doctors and all these other places talking about it, because I was like, why doesn't everybody know about this yet? It was a very new time for our age of prevention and treatment. And when I realized that, we had all of the tools to eradicate the disease by 96%, and America is the place that we're creating all of these drugs and things, but we were behind some third world countries as far as our knowledge to some people, it was shocking. And GLAAD was the one that approached me, along with Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, about presenting the media playbook on HIV and AIDS to MSNBC, because there was a whole new way to handle all of this stuff. There was all this new information, and we had realized that since we found out about HIV, the numbers have dropped in new infections. But then once it started, the story stopped being told on television, which ended with lawyer Rubin on ER. Then all of a sudden the infections started to rise, because after 9/11, I guess the country shifted their focus on what to talk about, and it wasn't the hot topic anymore, and then queer issues moved on to marriage and adoption and trans issues. And we kind of just like forgot to keep speaking, because people weren't, HIV and AIDS wasn't a death sentence anymore. People were living more longer, happier, healthier lives, that people just didn't think of it as a hot button issue. But the rise in the new infections is something that still needs to be addressed, and people still need to be educated. And, if we can't get the government, I go to, except for COVID, I've gone to, for 6 years, I've gone to AIDS Watch and lobbied Congress for HIV and AIDS. And if we can't get some of these Southern schools to have comprehensive sexual education, if we can't get needle exchange programs, I started thinking about, should I become a politician? Now that I know all this information, but I realized that it's us in this room and beyond, who have almost more power, the way Jonathan said, to get into someone's home and teach kids than Washington could ever do. Washington, as we know, is fueled a lot by lobbying for money and fueled by different kinds of opinions and views and compromises and all these other things. But we could say whatever we want as artists. As a comedian, I'm the last truth teller there is. As reality TV, as we're showing things, these great stories. There's no way faster for someone to know a gay person than to watch Queer as Folk or Looking or It's a Sin. These are shows that allow people to say, oh, I know Eddie Bear, and he's a friend of mine. And, and that wasn't lost on me going into this, because my experience with Mean Girls was the same. My character Damien was the first chubby gay teen to sort of be able to breathe without having his head dunked in a toilet, I guess, in a movie or something. And I got a letter from people, just saying I was tortured in middle school for being chubby and being a sissy. And then I got to high school, and on the first day of my freshman year, the popular senior girls were like, "You're Damien, come sit with us." And how much representation matters, and how much, I got a letter from a girl in Dallas that was like, "My mom would never let my gay best friend come spend the night, always thinking he was going to try something." But then when she realized, I was like, "Mama, he's just a Damien." Then he came to dinner every night. Our shows, our stories, these tales, these people's lives open the doors for real queer people to be able to enter homes and enter workspaces and breathe. And there's so much stigma surrounded around HIV that these stories continue to need to be told, because there's millions of people in our country alone with HIV. So it's like 25, 30 stories isn't going to cut it. It's just like, Jonathan, I have to tell you, like, Mr. Murray, however you want me to refer to you, I'm like such a fan, because like Pedro for me was the first, and even Norm was the first time I saw a gay person be able to just like be okay with like a hip hop writer and a cool model from MTV and like all this other stuff, like and just live and be a friend and be kissed on the face and be treated normal. And that was way before I even found out I was gay or was able to figure out what was going on with me, and the complex romantic stories of queer as folk and things like that. Those are things that, and Tales of the City, those are things that opened up my eyes as a queer person to know that I was okay. And one thing I consistently say, which is why I will show up to every one of these panels and do every other thing for the rest of my life, is just these stories need to be told. We need to have a voice. We lost a generation of people to tell their own stories. So it's our job, to continue to tell these stories and to continue, look at Nathaniel, who wasn't even born in the 80s. God bless you. Like now here you are, Nathaniel, in your art, being able to still continue and tell queer stories that were forgotten, that were left behind because these people were alienated and didn't have families to tell, what happened to your uncle? Or they just were alienated and they were shunned. And we can never let it happen again. And I think now more than ever in the time of a pandemic, we're all realizing what it must have been like to be so alone in a pandemic when all of us are together in this. And still feel all of those same creepy feelings, how it must have felt for a group of marginalized people who were already persecuted for who they loved to have to go through this almost alone.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And by the way, I am totally here for politician Franzese, so let us know if that happens.
No, I'm not doing it. I'm more here for Russell or Jonathan or somebody or Peter to hire me. Like, I'm more here for that. Like, let's be, to be honest with you, shit doesn't get done out there. It doesn't. I've been there. Even somebody, and I'm not dissing him. I think he's a great guy, but like the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, like one of our great gay people out there. He wasn't on the HIV caucus when I first met him, and he was such a fierce gay ally. Like there's just missing pieces in Washington, and it's going to continue to be us to tell those stories. I just had a friend who is in his late 50s who just came out to his family, and his wife made him tell his mom, and he didn't know how his mom was going to deal with it. But she was like, 5 years ago I might not have been able to handle this, but I see it on TV, I see it on the news, I see it on our stories, the way we're telling these things. This is what's going to evoke change, and this is what's going to force the hand of America to push Washington. It's not going to be me, trying to raise money in a tour bus to win a popularity contest.
Russell, if I can go back to you, because I think he brings up a good point, because the young people that are coming up today are obviously in a completely different world when it comes to what it's like to live with HIV and AIDS and be affected by that. So, especially, being Pride Month, I always say it's so important that we go back and look at LGBTQ history and know what it was like before. So why would you say that it's so important that the younger generation of today watches a show like yours, It's a Sin, and really understands that, look, it wasn't always like this?
I think it just shows how I love the fact that younger generation is just hungry for stuff. I mean, we worried when it came to It's a Sin because we were showing the 80s, we were showing stories in which, in every case in the drama, the AIDS was a death sentence. And we worried because that's no longer true. It wasn't even absolutely true at the time. That's how it was seen. And we worried for a long time thinking, we can't turn to the camera saying, don't worry, kids, nowadays you can get a medication and you'll be fine. So there was nothing we could do. So we worried about this until transmission. Of course, we got to transmission. And we discovered that, no one sits just watching their television anymore. They all sit there with a phone in their hands now. And what was brilliant was that younger generation, and everyone went onto their phones, and the beautiful thing was the charities were there waiting just waiting with information to. We had a remarkable situation where it was HIV testing week during our transmission, and the numbers of people applying for home testing is quadrupled. We quadrupled HIV testing, and that's the young audience reacting and responding. They love this stuff. They love it. It's a real honor to be on here with Daniel and with Patrick and with Jonathan. I think exactly what you're saying, Daniel. It's visibility, visibility, visibility. Whenever I do an interview, if I'm giving an interview about Doctor Who or science fiction or just about writing, whatever, I will always sit to and say, and I'm gay. And in terms of gay, I do that because you want to get those 14-year-olds sitting at home, not thinking about being gay, but thinking about time travel or something. Oh, there's a gay man, there's a queer person doing something I want to do. It's so important that I think. And honestly, what reality, I love drama, I work in drama, I love drama. I think what reality television, Jonathan, does for our visibility is extraordinary. I mean, in this country, we've had a gay Big Brother winner. We've got a trans, Nadia, the trans Big Brother winner. Really iconic, huge, important people that spreads the message without spreading a message. They don't have to be a politician, like you said, Daniel. They just exist, and they're there, and they're visible, and they're proud, and it's still not enough. You still meet people who haven't seen these things and who don't watch those areas of television. So you've just got to keep going. But that young audience is the one. I mean, they teach us. That's what's happening now. I'm 58 years old now, so I'm sitting down with a 16-year-old. Well, tell me about the world. How does it happen now? What's this fluidity? What's going on? Because that's the glorious thing that's happening. And long may that continue. I'm from a family full of teachers, and they've always said that. My mum and dad, my sisters have always said that the kids teach you. And finally, at this time in life, I realized that they're right. Wonderful.
Russell, as you were saying, we have to say it, not only for ourselves, but we have to drop one also for one we lost. We have to say it double. I don't care if I walk around, you know what I mean? If I walk around everyone else. At this point, before I played a gay character, I never really played a gay role. And then once I started playing gay and I came out, now that's what everybody offers me. I don't care. If I play gay roles the rest of my life, if I play one every 3 years, it's more impactful to me than doing a bunch of stuff that I don't want to be doing. We have to go forward and let people know that we exist and that we breathe like everyone else.
I know people always say to me, do you mind being bracketed as a gay writer? I'm going, I love it. It's what I am. What an honor to be called a gay writer. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Omari and Nathaniel, because touching on Russell, what you were talking about with the way that young people have responded to, your show specifically, curious for Omari and Nathaniel, because obviously with social media, you have a direct, connection to these people and these fans that are watching the show and people that have been affected and inspired and, enlightened by it. So Omari, I'll start with you. What has been some of the response that people have reached out to you and said, when they saw you playing Roscoe in this series?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that just was I found really profound and amazing was quite early on. I think it was maybe in the first couple of weeks of the transmission. Someone sent me a Twitter thread of a guy who had basically lost touch with his uncle. His uncle had been he'd removed himself from his family, or he'd been ostracized from his family. And there were all of these pictures of him, very similar kind of world and aesthetic and energy as Roscoe. He had these dreadlocks. He was very fabulous. And he'd always seen these pictures of him, but didn't know who he was. And he basically watched the show and sort of then reached out to his family, I think, and was like, I really feel like that I just want to reconnect with this person who I don't know in my family, because he's been, he feels so removed from us. And sort of, I guess, when you see a show about a group of people who are, I guess, in one sense, viewed as outsiders in society, and yet they're able to find their own family in that, that's inspiring to other people, that they then want to go out and connect with those people. So that was really amazing. Just sort of seeing something like that, and it keeps coming. It's really incredible, because it's crazy to me, because a couple of years ago we were in Manchester and it all just felt like this very amazing, tight, small kind of family unit, and now we're just sort of all over the globe. And it came out in Korea, I think, a few weeks ago. So it's completely crazy. And so I feel really privileged and humbled that because like for myself and Nathaniel to be able to sort of like step onto a screen for the first time and be able to sort of take on the responsibility of something where it feels like that we are representing and being visible. That is just, you can't ask for a greater thing than that, because, when I was younger and we're talking about where you find your education and where you sort of start to have a sense of understanding of these things, it was so, there were things that were few and far between. And also I was watching these things like EastEnders, like I remember Christian and Saeed in EastEnders. And I remember watching those things and kind of, you absorbed it all internally. You couldn't talk. I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. I just sort of processed it all on my own or not. And now I'm a part of something where we actually get to talk about it and we can be open about it and share it all with one another. So that's just amazing.
Thank you for sharing. Nathaniel, how about you? What was the fan response and, just the connection for the viewers for you?
In very much the same vein, I think it's people reaching out saying that they've been able to connect with people or have conversations with their family that they weren't able to have before, or that they've come out to their family, or that there's someone who is a friend of my mother who sent me a message saying that he'd come out years ago. It hadn't gone particularly well, but the show had let him and his mother sit down and have the conversation about why she was scared about him being gay and all these different things. And it's just really, like Omari says, like we had a great time filming. It was just a group of people who absolutely loved spending time and working together and love each other. And then all of a sudden we're all over the world. And it's not just that, as Omari was saying, it's our first time on screen. And it's not just that we had a great first job. It's that our first screen job has genuinely made an impact. And between that and, people who message me saying that it's thanking me for the representation of an Indian man, which isn't really something that they've seen before, where you can be Indian and queer and like cool. Like Ash is really cool. He's much cooler than I am. And so, but you don't, that's not something that you really see before, especially so loudly. And I think, it's people saying like, thank you for opening up conversations or for making them want to learn more, which is such a beautiful thing to hear. And just saying that the show has meant something to them, that it wasn't just good TV. I mean, it's good TV, but it's the show is so filled with love. And, I think that you see how all these characters love each other, and everyone involved, all the cast, all the crew, absolutely everyone there love each other still. And having that, I think, kind of bleed into society through this show, where then people are able to then talk about things more and want to know more, I think is such a beautiful thing. And I think that, as Omari says, I just feel privileged and I feel incredibly proud. It's been very, very humbling, but it's been wonderful to be able for people to think that they, for people to want to share the stories with us, saying this is what you've done for our lives. It's so lovely.
Thinking about this conversation that we've had here today about the various different times, obviously the 80s for It's a Sin, the 90s with Pedro Zamora and The Real World, the 2000s for Noah's Ark, and then looking for the 2010s. How important is it that we now, with the content that we make for people, for storylines with people living with and affected by HIV and AIDS, how important is it that we show people thriving and doing well and being, in a good point in their life too? You know what I'm saying? Because I feel like it's important that we realize what really happened, but I think it's equally important now that we show people living and thriving with HIV and AIDS.
I agree. And I worry, that because the disease has become so manageable in so many cases, thank God, yet the stigma still exists, right? So people still aren't comfortable just being open about that status, even though they're healthy, they take their pill or the medication or whatever, and for the majority of them, they are perfectly fine. It's a weird thing. It's weird that I never really see a character who just happens to be HIV positive, like a character who's diabetic or a character who, I never see that anywhere really. I see lots of commercials. I see lots of ads for PrEP and different HIV drugs and things. But yeah, it's a little concerning, the fact that it's kind of fallen out of the limelight, as it were. And I hope that we can kind of find ways to address it in a more contemporary way, because obviously the disease and the condition has evolved. It's interesting to see a show like Pose, which I love, and a period piece that's addressing the HIV and AIDS issue in a very moving and dramatic ways is quite interesting to see in this 21st century.
Last question, we're already running out of time, but I want to come back to Jonathan. Jonathan, just thinking about, obviously with reality TV, although that's very different than scripted, what we're talking about with It's a Sin, in terms of just progression for the queer community when it comes to reality TV, where do you think we're at? Because obviously we really still haven't had, a gay bachelor, a gay bachelorette. It's like, I feel like there's things happening and we're seeing more people represented, obviously, in shows like The Real World and stuff. But what's your kind of take on reality specifically when it comes to inclusion?
Well, actually, I think you'd have had a gay bachelor. He wasn't out. But now
Yeah.
I think, where you want to get to is whether it's a home makeover show or whether it's any kind of a show, you have full representation of the LGBTQ community. And they're there not just because they're gay, they're just there because they're cool people or they have a talent. And being gay is just part of who they are. So I think that's where we want to get to. We don't want our purpose for being there. We don't want it to always be the purpose of the storyline. We just want that. And I think we want the same thing in the scripted world. There's so many procedurals, Law and Orders, and these other things that where, the detectives are always straight. Well, why can't they be gay? So I think that's where we want to get to.
Or gay and chubby.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for being here and making the projects that you all do. And just a reminder, everyone, It's a Sin is still available to stream on HBO Max. So go do that. And thank you again. Thank you, OutFest. And we will see you. Happy Pride. Have a great rest of your time. And hopefully we'll be together in person soon. We're getting there.
Thank you, Anthony.
And now a conversation with APLA Health's Dr. Michael Gotley.
I'm Michael Gottlieb. I'm a physician, and in 1981, I was a faculty member at the UCLA Medical School. And in January of 1981, began seeing patients with the syndrome that we ultimately called AIDS. In June of 1981, in fact, June 5th to be exact, I was the first author of the report to CDC of 5 men with pneumocystis pneumonia, a condition that ultimately CDC named AIDS in the late part of 1982. So following publication of our report, the CDC sent out teams to the large cities and found additional cases of pneumocystis pneumonia and Kaposi sarcoma and published that in July in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, abbreviated MMWR. Prior to the report of AIDS, the MMWR was kind of an obscure newsletter issued by the CDC on a weekly basis, updating doctors around the country and infectious disease doctors in particular of what was new and what's brewing around the country in terms of outbreaks of infectious diseases. I remember these 5 patients in more detail than patients I saw last week. Their physical features, what they looked like, their stories are just embedded in my memory. Very quickly, as I saw how sick these patients were and the fact that most died within the first 6 months of the onset of their illness, the reality set in that this was something very serious and not uncommon, and I was worried. Media reports tended to refer to AIDS as a gay disease, and this was unfair and inaccurate from the very beginning. Many people in the general public thought that this was something that was not a problem for them and that they didn't need to care. The history of APLA Health dates from the fact that the response to the pandemic from the federal government and political authorities was very slow, and that resources were very limited for people living with AIDS, and also education about the syndrome was hard to come by. People were very worried. APLA, AIDS Project Los Angeles, was formed in the community as a community response to the pandemic and filled the vacuum that was left by the government. In 1981, AIDS was a life-threatening illness, and we didn't expect many people to survive. 40 years later, many people diagnosed with HIV are projected to live a normal or near normal life expectancy. And so the prognosis for people living with this virus is radically different. The stigma was very intense back in the 80s and 90s and even lingers today. Doctors specializing in HIV today have to do more than just treat the HIV. They have to look at the total patient and manage the comorbidities, the high blood pressure, diabetes, risk of heart disease and stroke. They have to select medications appropriately to minimize the occurrence of these complications and use medications that treat some of these complications as well. APLA Health keeps its promise to our patients by addressing the multiple issues facing people living with HIV. We keep up to pace with the technology for treating the comorbidities associated with our long-term survivors, and also with the newest technologies, newest medications for treating patients who are newly diagnosed. And we provide PrEP services, pre-exposure prophylaxis, and post-exposure prophylaxis to our patients.
Advocacy remains incredibly important to our efforts to end the HIV epidemic, so APLA Health continues to be a leader in DC and in Sacramento, advocating for increased funding for HIV programs, making sure that people with HIV, people at risk for HIV, have the support they need to stay healthy. APLA Health is sponsoring SB 258, the HIV and Aging Act, to make sure that older people with HIV have access to programs and services to improve their health. This bill would designate older people with HIV as a population of greatest social need under California law. So it's simply not good enough to say our doors are open to everyone, but these agencies on aging would need to conduct outreach to people with HIV and make sure that they have access to those programs and that those programs are welcoming and accessible.
At APLA Health, we work hard to assist our long-term survivors with HIV, both with their physical health and psychological health. APLA Health is going to contribute to getting HIV infections down 90% by 2030 by providing comprehensive care to our patients, by helping to keep our patients' viral loads undetectable so that the promise of U equals U is fulfilled, and also to provide pre-exposure prophylaxis and post-exposure prophylaxis to patients who are at risk for HIV.
So, you've just heard about all of the amazing work that APLA Health does. And as your host of this year's AIDS Walk Los Angeles, I am here to tell you how you can help. Hello, Los Angeles! It's Angina, and I'm so excited to be your host for the Walk Show. Bite-sized, like me, and bingeable episodes featuring amazing stories, inspiring guests, your participation, a whole lot of fun, and just the right amount of me. all in support of AIDS Walk Los Angeles 2021. We've been walking here in Los Angeles since 1985, and our annual tradition only grows stronger, even when we have to change course just a little. Just like last year, this walk's online, but even though we won't be gathering in person, I'm going to be walking and talking through some of Los Angeles County's most iconic and important neighborhoods, places where APLA Health is doing the work for communities affected by HIV and AIDS. That's right, this talk show is on the move, so try to keep up. Let's go. But I don't just want you to tune in. I want you to show out by signing up for AIDS Walk. Last year, APLA Health raised over $1 million to support vital wellness services in Los Angeles County like food pantries, elderly community support, HIV testing, PrEP and PEP, and much, much more. This year, we're gonna have so many Star Walkers, we're going past the moon. We're also making this year as interactive as possible. We've got games, challenges, prizes at every step, including lots of ideas for physical walks you can take with your friends, families, and teammates. Our Road to Stardom game will keep you on track and keep you motivated during fundraising, and I'll be here every week, to shine the spotlight on clinic and patient stories that will remind all of us why AIDS Walk Los Angeles is so important. Along the way, we'll be shouting out teams, walkers, and sponsors who are straight up getting the job done, inspiring all of us. So, no more messing around. It's done. Let's